Hey, so welcome to Samhain Part 2. If you haven't seen Part 1 yet, go back because we're going through history and I don't want you to be confused. Okay, so where we left off was talking about sacrifice and the ritual sacrifices of the Celts, likely at Samhain. So, we're going to pick up in the early to middle part of the 1st century AD or CE. The early church gaining power throughout Europe. So the powerful Christian church obviously went head to head with the pagan Celts. So to the early Christians, these gods and goddesses of these Celtic pagans were from the devil. The Celts believed in false gods. They were they're being tricked by the devil essentially. They were going against God and they were being tricked and deceived. So as Christianity spread, and of course they see that these Celts are worshipping the devil and doing evil things and being tricked by these spirits, they sent missionaries to convert them to Christianity. And then these missionaries, they found out pretty quickly that they're not going to convert for anybody, because in actuality, the Celts' spiritual practices were so deeply rooted in their daily lives, ain't nobody going to change that. Especially a new religion. Christianity was a new religion then. So, the Romans named these Celtic people pagan, or pagans. That's not what the Celts called themselves. So, paganus, is Latin for country dweller. Basically, it was a derogatory term like redneck or hick. So, where we get the word Celt as well, just as a side note, comes from the Greek word keltoi, K-E-L-T-O-I. Keltoi means different or strange. So we don't actually know what the Celts called themselves. But pagans today have taken the word back. They've taken back the word pagan, and it now means an earth-based religion, basically. So moving forward, in 600 CE, or AD, Pope Gregory I knew it would be impossible to convert the pagans. Their beliefs were so deeply rooted in their lives. You can't change that. So to attract the Celtic pagans to the new religion of Christianity, the Christians merged some pagan traditions with their own. The Christian Romans, in fact, did this all over Europe, even weaving some of the Germanic pagan traditions with their own, which is how we get Christmas trees and the date for Christmas on December 25th. If you think about it, if the Romans never conquered the Germans, or if they hadn't, at that time, we may not have the Christmas tree and we may not celebrate Christmas on December 25th. Jesus wasn't born in December. Solstice, Yule, December 21st, is the return of the sun. Just like Christmas is the birth of the sun. So it's kind of interesting how some of these things came along. So by the 700s, Pope Gregory III decided we're not going to accommodate these pagans anymore. No more making this, comfortable and fun for them. We're done. So in an effort to finally sway the Celts towards Christianity for the last time, the Pope declared that Samhain, which was the Celts' most sacred day, be declared a day of the Church. He named this day All Saints' Day, which was a time to remember all the Christian saints who didn't already have a day of their own. Another name for this day was All Hallows' Day. Hallows is a word for saint. All Hallows' Day. All Saints' Day. So, the day before All Hallows was All Hallows' Eve, or evening, obviously. So, over time, the word became corrupted, and now we have Halloween. So, despite the new church-sanctioned holiday of All Saints' Day, Samhain customs continued to be practiced by the Celts, who clearly were not going to give up. A further attempt by the church in the 10th century, much later, was to declare November 2nd to be All Souls' Day. This day was basically Samhain, but church-sanctioned, Christian-friendly Samhain. It was a day to remember all those that had died the previous year, just like Samhain. So it was also around this time that the tradition of soul cakes began. The tradition was basically created by the church, or adopted by the church, and then altered by the people who practiced it. So cakes were baked and given to the poor people in exchange for their prayers for the dead souls in purgatory, waiting to get into heaven. So, the church would give them cakes in return for their prayers. Trick-or-treating. That's basically how trick-or-treating started a very long time ago. Eventually, it became the tradition of going souling. Young men and boys would go from door to door. They would sing, and they would be given food, money, ale in exchange for their singing, instead of soul cakes. So, again, this is likely where trick-or-treating came from. And now we move on to one of my favorite topics, witchcraft. And again, because it's Halloween, a huge theme of Halloween is witchcraft. However, the Halloween witch, what does she look like? She's got green skin, black robes. She's got this doohickey of a hat, right? This is our modern Halloween witch. You know, this girl. Where did she come from? So what happened was the medieval church, because it's a very... I had to take this off. So, the medieval church, or basically Christianity, is very patriarchal, very male-dominated. Witches originally were healers. They were mostly women, midwives, they knew herbal healing, they were medicine women. Therefore, they had power. They're like doctors, basically. So, women with power in a Christian world dominated by men. I see a problem with this, says the church. So what happened was, you can't have women with power. What do? You change it. So these wise women, these healers, these herbalists, midwives, they were turned into devil's handmaidens. Yeah. So church says, okay, we can't have this, basically. So the witch became green skin, she became evil, she was the devil's handmaiden, she did evil things, you know, so this view changed. The church decided that witches were handmaidens of the devil. And cats, particularly black cats, which is how we have that superstition of black cats, was that witches would take on the form of cats if they were trying to hide. You know, so the superstition was that witches would take up the form of cats, or that they were the witch's familiar. So in the 1400s, Pope Innocent made a direct connection between witchcraft and the devil. I wonder how he did that. He probably made it up. He then banned the pagan practices altogether. So to further demonize these women as witches, these healers, these really wise medicine women, so to demonize them, again, still, over time, this wise woman healer was given a grotesque makeover, basically. She was given black robes, green skin, warts. She was haggard. She cackled evilly. She cast evil spells, and she wanted to eat your children. She danced with the devil. She was an evil hag. So this dark misconception lasted for centuries, and I'd say it still continues now. Because where do we have the misconception that pagans worship the devil? Probably came from this time period. So moving forward, during the 1500s you have the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther and the 95 Theses, stuff like that. So Protestantism is born, branches off from Catholicism. Catholicism is where you still have All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, and the transformed pagan practices, as well as the Catholic practices as well. So Halloween came to America with the Catholics who would settle in Virginia and Maryland, not with the Puritans who settled in Massachusetts. So basically what brings Massachusetts, my home state, into the Halloween lore was the Salem witch hysteria and the witch trials of 1692-1693. So, with the waves of European immigrants throughout the colonial period, the tradition of play parties became common at Halloween. These parties were held as public or community events where people would dress up in costume, they'd share seasonal food, tell ghost stories or stories of the dead, they would dance and sing and tell fortunes and do divination, have a grand old time. So this is before Halloween became celebrated throughout the entirety of America. So at this time it was basically just an autumn festival, not quite Halloween as we know it. So in the mid-1800s, with the Irish potato famine in Ireland, the Irish came to America, and they would bring with them their folklore and basically their Halloween traditions right from Ireland. So the Irish began carving pumpkins. That's how we have the jack-o'-lanterns, because of the Irish. Now, in Ireland, where they didn't have pumpkins, they had turnips. I don't know how you carve a turnip, so I bet you when the Irish discovered pumpkins here in America, they said, "Thank you, Lord, something I can carve." So that's how we have pumpkins instead of turnips. So it was at this time our modern idea of Halloween began kind of to develop more, even though it was more still an adult holiday. So it was around this time that people began dressing up. Excuse me. They began dressing up in costume. They would go around asking for money. That's kind of how trick-or-treating began to develop some more. So we still had superstitions, which grew out of this time. For example, young women believed that they could predict their futures, predict who their husbands would be, by practicing divination and things like candle wax or mirrors. So over time, Halloween became community-centered because there was a huge push to remove the frightening aspects and the ghostly aspects and the dead, to remove it from the practices, to make it more friendly and community-based. Excuse me. So parades and parties became more common as we come into the 1900s. So vandalism was also a huge problem. So there were community efforts to tone it down. So, and then World War II happens. So during the war, there was no trick-or-treating, no parties. Everybody was focused on the war effort. So after the war, what did we get after the war? Oh, a huge baby boom. So with a huge boom with lots of children, Halloween came back, but now it's more child-oriented. It was more for kids. So Halloween's back. It's a kids' holiday now, and it's practiced at home and in the classroom. So trick-or-treating as we know it today became a way for the whole community, and not just, little parties. Now we have the whole community celebrating this festive autumn holiday. So trick-or-treating was likely also a way to keep children from causing trouble and playing tricks, like I mentioned the vandalism earlier, and the attempt to tone it down. Well, hey kids, come door to door, get candy, stay out of trouble. That's one of the theories I've read. So that's how we have our secular Halloween of today. So it's nice, we can be crazy, we can have fun, it's scary, it's mysterious, it's dark. We can dress up and party in outrageous costumes, and we can have fun in a way we normally wouldn't, basically. So that's how we have Halloween today. I've left out some minor details because there's just simply not enough time to cover everything, but that's basically it. So we're going to move on to the last part, and I'm going to be talking more about Samhain as the pagan holiday. So, excellent. Stick around, I am having lots of fun, and it's just about midnight, so it is almost Halloween.